Okay, welcome to the On Your Side podcast. I am Gary Harper, joined by my producer, Colin Stanton. Thanks for filling in today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, Susan Campbell, still on maternity leave. Yeah, so, we talked about this the last podcast, the fact that she's up to child number 3, so congratulations to her. And but like we were saying earlier, she has her hands full.
Yeah. Sending at least one off to school this week, I think.
Okay.
So that makes it probably a little easier, but yeah.
But then, he comes back, though. So it's back to 3. But, hey, today we're talking about one of my favorite topics. One of them is real estate. The other one is money.
Yeah.
So more specifically, we're talking about salaries, how to ask for a raise and how to negotiate your pay when you have a job offer. So it's always really exciting when you apply for a job and you actually get a job offer. Do you remember the last job? I see you've been here. In fact,
it's been a while.
Today you just got your 25-year certificate for being with this company.
Yes.
So it's been a long time.
It's been a long time for me.
Do you remember your first job offer? Like the job offer that happened 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think it happened over the phone, and there wasn't a whole lot of negotiation. I was in a spot where I was pretty desperate to get out of where I was.
Yeah. You were up in
I was up
Oregon.
in Portland working an overnight shift.
Yeah.
And not enjoying myself at all.
Yeah.
And I was desperate to get out of there. My wife was desperate to get out of there. So we were pretty much jumping on any offer we got.
Yeah.
And I was very happy with the company, and the offer was fine, but there wasn't a lot of negotiation because I couldn't say yes fast enough to hire a mover and get me out of there.
There's priorities. If you wanted to jump as quickly as you wanted to and avoid that overnight shift, I could see why, money's important, but just get me out of here,
Yeah, and I was getting a raise from where I was, so I was happy.
Yeah.
Might have been able to get more, but don't know that I worked that hard to get more out of them.
Well, it's 25 years. You can't cry over it now.
Yeah, no.
Colin, so we're here.
Yes.
So anyway, glad to have you here. And, it brings back good times, good memories about job applying and negotiating. And if you're young, if you haven't been through it before, it's very intimidating.
Oh, it's very intimidating. Even if you've been through it before, it can be intimidating.
Absolutely. So for help on that, we're talking to Andres Laras from the Shapiro Negotiatiosn Institute. Hello, Andres.
Hello. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on 25 years. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, thank you. It sneaks up on you in a hurry.
Sounds like you've been underpaid for 25 years, but you've been doing a good job.
If you could tell my boss that would be great. Yeah.
This is going to be on the record, so I think so.
Thank you.
This is why he's been around 25 years, because they're like, wow, we really got Colin cheap.
Yes.
So anyway, hey, thanks for joining us here in San Antonio, and you're joining on the On Your Side podcast. What's going on in San Antonio?
Well, trying to stay cool and avoid tornadoes, apparently, because that's what Texas has to offer these last couple of days. So it's been interesting. Not sure if it's touching Arizona too, but the weather has been wild here.
Yeah. Well, it's a big state, so a lot of those tornadoes happen in what they call Tornado Alley, which is a little bit like between Dallas and Oklahoma. And so, just take your umbrella and you'll be fine out there, Andres. Hey, let me talk a little bit about salaries and negotiating. First of all, why is it such an intimidating situation or an issue for people to get involved with when they're coming to the table and asking either for a raise or they're negotiating a job offer?
Well, there's so much there, but there's two parts really I kind of describe it as. The first is just the negotiation, right? Generally, negotiations can make you a little bit anxious because if you push too hard, essentially you're kind of worried you're going to destroy the relationship or damage the relationship. If you don't push hard enough, then you feel like you left something on the table. And so that balance is delicate for any negotiation. And then you layer on for these where it's a salary, meaning it's emotional for you and really affects your livelihood. And I think that cranks up the stakes, that cranks up the emotions. So I think all of those together make it naturally a complicated and complex thing. But hopefully after this conversation today, we can make it a little bit easier for folks.
It's all about how you ask and how you discuss the situation. So you don't want to be overly aggressive. You also don't want to be a smart aleck, somebody who's going to be a turnoff. How do you approach the conversation? Do you sound optimistic? Do you sound energetic? What do you do when you're negotiating a salary or asking for a raise?
Absolutely. And I love the way you said it because it's really the how is underappreciated, right? First of all, it's what you're going to say, right? And what you're going to ask for. But the how is really underappreciated. And I think that's the piece where you want to be positive. And so this is kind of the mix that I think people struggle with, but you want to be positive because there's no reason not to say, like, for example, first of all, remind yourself that it's great that you got a job offer, right? That's a good sign. So there's positive there. That also means that they want you, and you, presumably, because you applied to be there, want to be there. So I think you want to start with points of momentum and points of agreement and kind of build that up some. And you want to be positive because obviously you both have something that you want from each other. And that's why it's really happening in the first place. And then, though, that doesn't mean that you have to give up, right? That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask for more. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't counter offer. And especially a lot of data says that most companies are actually expecting a counter. So I think you should really remember that before you go in.
I'm imagining that when you stay on the positive side, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you get an offer and it's not in the ballpark, you should probably say something like, I'm very excited about this job opportunity, very excited about the company. I'd love to work here, but we need to get these numbers moving in an upward direction. What can you do to help me out? Is that a good way to phrase things?
Bingo. It's the two parts. Number one, be positive. And so you're saying some of those things are, hey, I want to be a part of this. I appreciate the offer. Yes, absolutely. And then part two, exactly like you said, it's questions, right? So questions on, what do you base your offer on? That's a great one, right? That's the first offer. What do you base it on? You can ask questions about, what do others in the role make? Or I love kind of anchoring a little higher and saying, hey, what do the highest people in this role make? And so what you're doing is you're asking questions to get the other side talking, rather than, ideally, once you get that first offer, you don't want the first thing out of your mouth to be a counter with higher dollars. You want to do a little bit of probing first.
You mentioned about not wanting to damage the relationship, not wanting to come across as difficult. How big a concern should that be? That would worry me in a negotiation. Should I be concerned that I'm going to push and they're going to go, yeah, we can hire someone else. This guy's not worth it.
So it's very real. So I think two things to keep in mind. First, the macro, right? So if you think about the last 2-3 years, right, we've seen it was a very heavy employees market. It's kind of turning towards an employers market. So you have to be aware of that. So you might want to push a little less hard now than you might have 2 years ago, realistically. But the second is, I would say, if you're reasonable, meaning you base your offers on precedents. For example, you look up on Glassdoor, on salary.com, on other information, what the job is worth, and you're aiming high, and you do it the right way, positively, optimistically, in a reasonable, empathetic way, it's very unlikely they're going to absolutely be turned off and shut you down. Now, you may not get what you want, but it's very unlikely they absolutely shut it down, right? If they've done the offer, they want you. So I would say those are the two things to keep in mind, the macro and the micro, kind of the way you ask it. If you're reasonable, no reason it shouldn't happen.
We have two different categories: asking for a raise, and also the other one, negotiating a salary during a job offer. So let me talk a little bit about the job offer part of it. You should know what the position pays. You should have like a kind of a window, because you don't want to go into the job interview and get an offer and you're demanding $100,000 when it only pays $50,000. There's no way basically to even meet in the middle on that. So very important to know exactly the window of pay when you're applying for a job.
So absolutely. So, and actually that's been made easier. So it's outside of my scope, of expertise, but certainly a lot of states over the last few years have actually made regulations where publicly posted jobs actually have to have that information. So over the last few years, that's come a long way, and that'll help there. And they've done that for equality and other reasons, but it certainly helps to arm with that information. And the ranges can't be from 50,000 to 180,000 for the job, right? It's got to be some reasonable range. And so I think, number one, you should know that you should do your own research for sure. You should go on these websites to take a look, and you should be aware that they're not perfect. And I do like the differentiation between kind of a new job offer, because you don't necessarily know the people, right? It's a new company, let's say a new job, is a little bit different, not dramatically, but it is a little different. And your current role asking for more, because there already are relationships and there's already a track record, right? Presumably, if you're talking about the value you bring to the table, you can point back to the value you've already brought to the table, and that's a different conversation.
How does this work for things beyond salary? Are the negotiation tips essentially the same if we're talking vacation time or, work from home opportunities? Do you look at the same basic issues for that?
So I love the question. You guys are both just teeing me up here, because not only does it work for them, but actually a very counterintuitive recommendation is you want to be negotiating more than one thing at a time. And here's what happens. Naturally, we think, well, I don't really want to be pushing for, I don't want more time off, and I'm going to ask for a better title and more money. They're going to throw me out of the room. But what happens is you ideally want to be negotiating over several things at once. because then you can get some of the things that they are kind of less expensive for them or less meaningful for them, and you're trading highest value for you versus lower value for them and vice versa, right? So look, we can only give you X more dollars, not all the way to what you want. We can get you a higher title that will probably lead to more pay, and we can get you more vacation time and a little bit more matching on a 401k. Well, that could put more dollars in your pocket. It's certainly worth more value, but maybe you're at the top of the band for what they can pay for that specific role, as an example, right? So it is kind of counterintuitive, but definitely be negotiating more than one thing is a very easy recommendation to put into play.
When it comes to a job offer, if you get to that point, even before you get to that point, there's the strangest question that I think people have a lot of difficulty answering, and a lot of times it's just on the paper or on the application online. How much are you making now? How do you even answer that question? Because you don't want to lowball yourself, because the prospective company may pay like really, really high. And then if you say, well, I'm making this and it's really, really low, they're going to like, oh, we can get this guy for cheap. How do you answer that question?
That is a tough question. And I believe, again, outside of my domain a little bit, some of those are starting to get removed. There's a few states I think you cannot ask that, actually. And so it's going to expand a little bit, I think. But I would say generally, yes, you definitely want to avoid it. And I think part of that is then the how, right? I think we want to avoid it. It can be challenging how to do it in a respectful way. So I like questions around, or conversations around, look, that role is different. And number one, whether it's the responsibilities, the title, and then even more importantly, there's a reason I'm sitting with you here today. I'm looking for a new role, right? So the fact that we're anchoring based on another role that I am leaving, I don't think either of us want to be sitting in that position a year from now. We want me to be here long term. So let's not focus on the current position. Let's focus on what this position pays and all the value that I bring to this role. And so I think you want to kind of be totally forward focused. And what you'll find is if you switch the conversation there a little bit, it makes them even more uncomfortable, right? It's unlikely they're going to volley it back 5 more times, say, no, no, no. We really want to know what what you're currently making. It's unlikely. It's possible, but certainly less likely.
Those uncomfortable conversations, is that a way to make it work for you, to make it as uncomfortable as possible?
Well, I wouldn't say
well, not uncomfortable as possible, but
no. And I wouldn't say you're looking for them, and I don't think that that's the make or break. But I think there's something to be said for being comfortable, or at least being able to manage the uncomfort. So I would say there's 2 areas where you think of this. There's kind of the patience, meaning the long term, that this may take a day, a week, a month longer than you think, and being patient. Doesn't mean you don't want to follow up and keep a certain cadence, but what happens is we start getting a little bit anxious about it, and then that little bit of anxious gets very anxious, and then we say things we might regret, right? It signals to the other side you would take less. And then in the moment, that same patience kind of translates into more of a silence, right? You're in a conversation, and so they ask you, an uncomfortable question, and all of a sudden there's silence. And it's interesting. We do some video role-playing coaching, and I would just tell this to anyone. It's amazing. You ask someone after you videotape them, how long was that silence? And they will tell you 10 times less than reality. I mean, they'll say it was like 20 seconds, and it was really 2.5 seconds. It feels so long. So just kind of being aware of that, taking a step. And I would say one last practical tip on that. If you do have to break the silence, it's just too uncomfortable, I would ask a question. Rather than answering a question, I would ask another one. Tell me more about that question. Why is that important? What do you mean by that? And so that can help to break the silence, but without kind of giving in, if you will.
Doing this as long as I've been doing it, and kind of going on the same topic of be comfortable with silence. When I interview people, if there is silence, I just let the silence roll. I don't say a word, and the reason for that is it makes the other person want or feel like they have to speak up. And then sometimes I have my best interviews are when there's a little bit of silence and I just let it breathe, and then they continue on with something they probably wouldn't have said had I interjected with a question and then kind of like broken that moment. So very, very important. And again, the same rings true, I guess, with negotiating a raise or a job offer. So very, very good information. You had indicated something about having a decision tree ready. What the heck is that? How does it work?
Yeah. So what does that mean, really? That basically means you want to have thought through, let's say the simplest one. And let's talk about the example of a new job offer, just so we're going to be very clear about it. So you're going in, you got, they said you're going to get the job, or we want to offer you something. And then in your mind, before you get that offer, you think, okay, if it's less than this amount, here's how I'm going to react. If it's in this range, the kind of the sweet spot, here's how I'll react. And if it's more than that, here's how I will react. And the reason you do that is, surprisingly, it goes both ways. So you get a very low ball offer. Your first response might be, that's ridiculous. And what does that mean? You may say something you regret, right? You really want the job, and you may say something you'll regret immediately, and that could kill your chances. So
yeah, like
the
that
question
sucks.
earlier,
That sucks.
exactly.
I'm worth more than that.
Exactly. That's ridiculous. You guys are lowballing.
How dare you?
Exactly. And so you don't want to do that. Now, but you may decide that you want a canned answer for, that's well below what I thought it was. I'm disappointed. Let me think about it and get back to you. Or what do you base that on? It could be a question. But that way, you're going to be a lot more clear if you thought about it in advance. And then, the middle has the same. But if you go to the upper end, this actually happens sometimes too. You're expecting something and you get something better. And I've seen folks, jump across the table and try to shake hands before they change their mind. And what happens is that doesn't feel good either, right? The moment you do that, the other side's thinking, whoops, we kind of overpaid this person. And I think we may have made a mistake here.
Yeah.
They don't feel good. They just hired you. And the first thought they have is, ooh, we might have made a mistake here. So I think the decision tree is just, hey, if this happens, if that, if this, and make slight adjustments based on that. And you're going to come out with a lot more conviction and be a lot more thoughtful in how you respond.
Hey, can you expand on that a little bit? If the offer is a lot better than you thought, yep, what's your reaction to that? I mean, do you just go with the bluff and go, we're almost there, but can you sweeten the pot just a little bit?
So yeah, great question. And it's funny, most of the time people start thinking about the opposite, right? If it's a lowball offer, what do I do? But the reality is sometimes you do get more than you think. And so, just like in poker, I don't think you necessarily want to be greedy and be like, oh, that's not going to cut it, guys. I mean, unless you increase it, I'm not doing it. You don't want to go that far. But I think, thank you for walking me through it. I have some questions about the rest of the package to better understand it. Tell me more about the PTO,
401k,
health benefits, all those things. And so there's kind of not much of a reaction, right? So in your mind, you're thinking like, oh, that's great. Oh my goodness, I would definitely take this. But number one, in reality, you do want to know the rest of the package. And number two, that takes away some of the pressure there. You move on from that. Great. You've documented it's a great salary and you want to get some of the other details and you end it with, let me get back to you as they would expect you to, because, you're not going to accept on the spot.
How do you know when you've pushed about as far as you can? You've got what you're going to get. And it's time to just make a decision on your own, but this is it. Are there signs you should look for?
It's an interesting question. So I think as far as when you're at a point where you're pushing far, I think usually we say, look back at the cadence that's been the back and forth, right? And look back at kind of how much they're moving, if any, the response time and the tone. And if you usually see some signs around, they start to get more frustration or the movements are minimal. That's number one. And number two is you want to combine that with, what's your bat now? What's your other alternative? So you mentioned at the beginning, as we opened, that, you were in a job working nights that you didn't enjoy and you were desperate to get out of there.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to end that conversation earlier because you have more to lose than you have to gain. But if you love your job and this will be a great opportunity only if you reach this, well, then it's worth pushing a little bit more because you may not take it otherwise. And so I think, it's your personal situation, your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, combined with kind of the cadence and like you're looking at progression, right? The cadence and the frustration or emotion shown. And those typically all combined can give you some sense.
You can also overstay your welcome. I mean, if you're up to the 8th meeting or the 8th phone call, it's at that point, the potential employer is like, to hell with this. This is going on too long. I need to hire somebody. That kind of the number of visits and conversations, it has to have a ceiling.
Absolutely. And I think we call it deal fatigue. At some point, you think it's not even worth it. And you get this in everything, not any type of negotiation, right? Like you go back and forth, 1, 2, okay, I get it. There's some countering 3, 4, and you're at 8. And you're thinking, this is ridiculous. It's taking so long. And then all these other thoughts start to creep in, right? The employer's like, holy smokes, if Craig's going to make me go 8 rounds for an extra $500, he's going to be a disaster to have working here, right? I can't imagine when I ask him to do something. And all of a sudden, whether it's real or not, these things creep in. So that is very much true, and deal fever kicks in. So you want to be reasonable and realistic. And so you want to, is this worth it? You want to ask yourself every time. You don't want to sell yourself short, but you do want to ask that.
I love it. Deal fatigue. Hey, Andres, tell us a little bit about Shapiro Negotiations Institute, what you guys do. And if people are interested in finding out more, how do they find you?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. So we're a 29-year-old negotiation training and consulting company. So we work with really kind of larger companies, usually enterprise level, but companies of all industries and all sizes. And we either train, whether it's sales, procurement, project management, engineers, could be any role really, or we advise them on negotiations. And so sports is one that we sometimes are known for, but we do lots of other industries as well. And if you want to find us, let's say our website or LinkedIn, ShapiroNegotiations.com, or just our LinkedIn. Either works.
All right. Sounds really good. Andres, thank you so much for being on the On Your Side podcast. And I think Colin is pretty excited right now. I think he's probably going downstairs and he's going to ask politely for a raise. Right?
Sure. Yeah. Why not?
I've got your back.
All right. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, Andres, thank you so much for being on the On Your Side podcast. Have a great time down in San Antonio and be safe.
Thank you very much. You too.
The On Your Side podcast is produced by Brad Denny. Our audio engineer and editor is Todd Martin. Segment producer is Colin Stanton. And I'm Gary Harper.
And I'm Susan Campbell. If you have a problem you can't resolve, maybe we can, send us a message through azfamily.com or our AZ Family mobile app. Look for the On Your Side section and leave us a message. Thanks so much for listening to the On Your Side podcast. And if you like it, leave us a review. We'll see you next week.
On Your Side is on Good Morning Arizona every weekday morning at 6:45 and 7 o'clock, and every weekday evening on Good Evening Arizona at 4 and 5 o'clock. You can also catch it on Arizona's Family News at 9 on 3TV every weeknight.